President Trump waking up at the White House this morning after his busy three-day international trip, the second international trip of his presidency.
Here he is arriving home overnight. First Lady Melania Trump by his side. During the G-20 summit over in Germany, he met with all sorts of foreign leaders from Great Britain to China, but it is Russia dominating the headlines yet again this morning.
A new meeting between members of Team Trump and a Russian national now coming to light. ABC News has learned that during the campaign, Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner met with a Russian lawyer with connections to the Kremlin.
Meanwhile, the Russian President Vladimir Putin now speaking out about his face-to-face meeting with Trump, insisting that Trump seemed to accept his denials of Russian election meddling. And President Trump tweeting this morning saying, "I strongly pressed President Putin twice about Russian meddling in our election. He vehemently denied it. I've already given my opinion."
George is standing by with analysis, but we're going to start here with ABC's senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, who is in Hamburg, Germany for us this morning, where the G20 summit took place. Cecilia, good morning to you.
Hey, Paula, good morning to you. You know, White House aides are calling this trip a huge success for the president, and really, it was a chance for him to escape some of that chaos back home in Washington. But while he was in the air on Air Force One on his way home, another Russia story broke. Overnight, President Trump and the First Lady landing back in Washington and greeting them upon their arrival, another Russia headline. The New York Times reporting that the president's son, Don Jr., his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and former campaign chairman Paul Manafort met with a Russian lawyer who has ties to the Kremlin during a meeting at Trump Tower. That previously undisclosed meeting happening at the height of the campaign, just 2 weeks after the president won his party's nomination. In a statement, Don Jr. tells ABC News an acquaintance asked him to attend the meeting and that it was primarily about an adoption program. A source familiar with the meeting says the campaign was not discussed. As for that other meeting, Vladimir Putin now discussing his side of what happened behind closed doors. The Russian president saying, quote, "Trump on TV is very, very different from the Trump in person." In that meeting, he says the president pressed him repeatedly about Russia's election meddling. He denied the allegation and said President Trump accepted that, saying it seemed to me that he took it into account and agreed. The White House not publicly disputing Russia's claim. In another high-stakes meeting, President Trump talking North Korea with China's Xi Jinping.
I know that we'll have eventually success. It may take longer than I'd like, may take longer than you'd like, but there will be success in the end, one way or the other.
The administration growing increasingly frustrated with China's refusal to take a harder line on Pyongyang, especially in the wake of last week's successful intercontinental ballistic missile test. Now, a major point of contention between President Trump and many of the world leaders here at the G20, his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. The United States, it turns out, was the only country in this entire summit to not sign on to a climate change resolution. But again, Dan and Paula, the White House is chalking this trip up to a big win for President Trump. He's got another foreign trip in just a couple of days. He heads to France to celebrate Bastille Day with the new French president, guys.
Yeah, but on climate change, it is the G19. America isolated on this issue for now. Cecilia, reporting from Hamburg, thank you very much. Let's bring in our chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos, who's going to be hosting This Week later this morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, guys.
Let's start with this meeting between members of the Trump inner circle and this Russian lawyer. Do you see any significance here?
Well, a couple of things about that. Number one, we know that up until through the election, President Trump was denying any contacts with any Russians in his campaign, all through the campaign, saying absolutely not. This meeting proves that isn't true. I'm sorry, I'm dropping my glasses right here. Meeting proves that's not true, on top of some other meetings we've learned about since then. So that denial is off the table right now. Still no evidence of collusion, but we do know this Russian lawyer had been opposed to U.S. sanctions on Russia and is very close to the Kremlin.
And Putin, he spoke with Russian media and said that Trump seemed to accept his denials of Russian hacking in the election, and the White House refused to refute this. What do you make of this?
Well, it's complicated. Number one, Secretary of State Tillerson came out and said, basically, the president pressed this, and then we agreed to move on to focus on other issues. So it does appear that the bottom line here is that these two sides agreed to disagree, at best, over this issue, over Russian interference. And it appears now at least the United States is not contemplating, even though they haven't said that, more sanctions for this Russian interference. Instead, they've set up this joint group to work on cyber hacking. But that's one of the questions I want to put this morning to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin.
The other thing you may want to talk to Mnuchin about is Congress is returning from the July 4th break. What's the state of play when it comes to repealing and replacing Obamacare, and what impact does this have on the rest of the Trump agenda, including cutting taxes?
It does seem like the effort to repeal Obamacare lost steam over the July 4th recess. You saw a lot of Republican senators get pummeled back home by constituents, those who are supporting the repeal, not as vocal over the recess. And now you have, it looks like, at least 10 Republican senators who are holding off from signing on to the repeal. Remember, they can only lose 2. Now, we're talking to Senator Ted Cruz this morning, who says he has an answer to this that might bring on other Republicans. There's a lot of skepticism in the party about that. We'll talk about that. But also, you make another good point. There's only 3 weeks now until the August recess. The president has not had a major legislative victory going into that recess. That would break tradition with all previous presidents in modern times. And they have a lot of big issues on their agenda, including tax reform, including the budget, including the debt limit.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure as well. That appears not to be going anywhere right now, but the Treasury Secretary in the middle of all that as well.
Yeah, that August hiatus is imminent. All right, George,
thank
you.
Guys.
It's great to have you. And a reminder, everybody, George has a big show this morning. As he just mentioned, he's going to be talking with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Senator Ted Cruz. Plus, George goes one-on-one with Walter Schaub after he resigned as the government's top ethics watchdog. That's coming up later this morning on This Week with George right here on ABC. Thanks again, George.